We're on the cusp of one of the greatest, most drastic transportation and energy transitions in the course of human history. Lots of different startup companies are attempting to capitalize on this great transition, which is bringing more sustainable and more affordable forms of transportation, more convenient, more connected, safer forms of transportation for the new age of electric vehicles. And unfortunately, a lot of these startup companies are not that different from each other. And statistically speaking, and the law of averages say not all of them are going to make it. Some will die sooner than others because of how much cash they have on hand. But you may think some startups are doing better than others simply because they had more cash on hand and were able to burn it for longer than others. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest mistake so many of these EV startups are making are assuming that with this drastic rethinking of engines to powertrains and battery packs and motors, they're all thinking we need to just keep our existing designs of gas-powered vehicles and just slap some batteries on the inside and hope for the best. And it's resulting in these very heavy, very unprofitable, very expensive to manufacture vehicles that take a very long time to charge, that require these insanely complex battery management systems, all of them to accommodate for vehicles that were built and designed during the combustion engine age. If you're a rich billionaire out there looking for ways to make a difference, make an impact, and figure out which of these companies is actually managing their capital wisely, which of these startup companies is actually making good use of every dollar they get, you need to be looking for startups that are thinking outside the box, because there's so many of these companies that all have the same doom, and it's just a matter of time before they inevitably reach bankruptcy because they don't want to rethink the way vehicles are made, and they want to keep their dated footprints and existing form factors to keep the transition simple and keep it easy, but that results in the vehicles being too expensive or too heavy for the masses, and that absolutely is going to prevent people from making this switch to electric vehicles. And it's essentially forcing a lot of the public to continue paying for overpriced gasoline, overpriced maintenance repairs. They got to worry about transmissions and head gaskets and oil changes and brake pad replacements. All of that is going to continue draining everyday people's bank accounts because these electric vehicles, which we all know are our future, are being designed poorly and for the wrong demographic and not being drastically rethought for the electric vehicle age. So when you're looking for which startups are going to make it, you have to look at not just which ones are making the most desirable products, but which ones are managing their funds the most wisely. And in my experience of interviewing several different startup companies and analyzing so many different company spreadsheets, there is no electric vehicle startup company that is managing their budget as wisely as Aptera is. They've already started showcasing their production intent castings, mostly made out of carbon fiber, and have started massive investments into their battery pack supplier and have already started building some of the early production intent battery modules. Basically, with the couple dozen $1 million they've raised, which is pennies compared to what Rivian and Lucid had to spend to just get to deliveries, we're talking billions and billions of dollars worth of investment on these very expensive, inefficient vehicles with giant battery packs. And then very quickly, just after a year or two, they ran out of demand. Now they're having to scramble together lease options on vehicles that are already not profitable, and they're somehow trying to get the funds together to build cheaper vehicles for the masses, but still designing them like you would a traditional gas vehicle, which is why they're gonna struggle so much and for so long with profitability. Whereas Aptera rethought the vehicle from the ground up for the electric vehicle age. And you need to find these kind of unique exclusive advantages in a brand in order to figure out who's going to survive this transition, because car companies, statistically speaking, most of the time they do not make it. It is very rare for any car brand to successfully mass produce a vehicle profitably and continue to thrive. It's even harder with an electric vehicle company, and it's even harder right now when so few people are willing to bet on electric vehicle brands. But I'm not telling you to just jump on a brand blindly because it looks cool, or I like the logo, or I like the design or something. No, live life with your heart, but invest with your brain, right? And the Aptera is designed and manufactured from the ground up with logic and with physics backing it up every step of the way. What do people want in electric vehicles? What's preventing people from making that transition? They want good range, they want reliable charging, and they need affordability. That's what so many of these other EV startups are struggling with right now. They can't find enough people that are willing to pay these $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 prices for these EVs that have okay-ish range with a pretty lousy charging infrastructure. Whereas Aptera from the beginning knew that they needed to have access to the supercharger network in order for the vehicle to succeed succeed. That's why they pioneered the adoption of the NACS port, starting a petition to make sure that was the standard for the United States. And then shortly after Elon acknowledged this report, Tesla opened up the North America charging standard, which now pretty much everyone in the automotive industry has agreed to use in North America. Aptera was the one who kickstarted that because they knew that this was the only way forward. There are a lot of people that are very hesitant to change the way they do things, that are very hesitant to learn how batteries charge and learn how to start plugging in their vehicles from home and that kind of thing. So if you don't make the charging infrastructure as simple and as intuitive and as plug and play as possible, a lot of people are just not going to do it. And Aptera, unlike these other startup companies that are targeting 300-ish miles of range, their launch edition is targeting 400 miles of range, which you will not see in any other EV at this price point. Even Tesla's next generation vehicle platform is not going to be targeting much more than 300 miles of range, which is going to be more of a learning curve for people. And as we're seeing continuing rise of costs for living, more and more people are living in apartments. Less and less people are able to afford homes. Interest rates are too high, and landlords or foreign entities are buying up lots of land, preventing a lot of the free market from being able to afford their own housing. That results in less and less of the buying public being able to charge their vehicles from home, which is one of the key reasons a lot of people are able to justify switching to an EV. If you can charge from home, you're willing to live with less range. You're willing to live with not as many charging stations as you have gas stations because your home becomes the refueling source. But there are countless people living in situations where they have on-street parking or they live in apartment complexes and they just simply cannot charge their vehicle from home. So if they want to go EV, they are forced to charge from a DC fast charging location, and those typically are more expensive than charging from home, and again, a lot more inconvenient because they take longer than a gas pump and there's not as many of them as gas stations. So Aptera addresses this by being efficient from the ground up and prioritizing having a super aerodynamic design, enabling 10 miles per kilowatt hour where most other EVs barely get more than 4, and that allows them to coat the exterior of the Aptera with solar cells, meaning the Aptera is literally capable of charging itself. Why is no one else talking about this? This is the only brand that is actually planning on mass producing a vehicle that is affordable to the masses, cheaper than the average new car price, that's also capable of seriously putting in meaningful range back into the battery pack. We're talking 30 to 40 miles of range per day for free for every vehicle that is manufactured. Like, no one else comes even close to that, and that absolutely makes the vehicle more practical and accessible to the masses because it doesn't require you to have a garage. It doesn't require you to have a dryer outlet to plug into for fast charging overnight. It doesn't require you to install some complicated level 2 charging equipment at your house, which not everybody wants, not everybody can afford, or a lot of people just live in places where that's not feasible. The Aptera addresses that, and even if you live in a cloudy climate or some place where you don't get a lot of sunshine, even if you just get 20 or 15 miles of range per day, that's still going to be over 6,000 miles of free charging a year, which you're not going to find in any other vehicle. No one's going to just be handing out free energy for the life of the car. That increases the affordability because people don't buy cars and just have them sit at home, they drive them. So the difference of cost of maintenance is going to be far lower for this vehicle, not to mention Aptera is a right to repair company, making sure everything can be worked on yourself. That lowers the cost of insurance, that lowers the cost of repairs. And because the Aptera is so much more efficient, that means they can use much smaller battery packs in their vehicle, which makes them far cheaper to build, far more scalable. Not to mention, the Aptera doesn't require a paint shop because they rely on more durable materials like forged carbon fiber, as well as wrapping on the sides to make sure it's protected, and a lot of the exterior is covered in solar cells anyway, so there's just no need to paint those. And the paint shop, as you can see in most of these other startup brands, is one of the most expensive parts of the manufacturing process. That's why Tesla was so keen on making the Cybertruck not require any paint, because they knew they could use a much smaller factory footprint and save so many steps if you didn't have to worry about that. So Aptera doesn't have a paint shop to worry about, has much smaller battery packs so they can build it more profitably, while at the same time still having way better range than everybody else and starting at less than half the price. We're talking under $40,000 for a fully electric vehicle with NACS that can access the Tesla supercharger network, that's capable of charging itself via sunlight. That's a fraction of the price from all of these other startup brands, and that's probably why Aptera has over 46,000 paid reservations. And a lot of people get nervous about that design because it's so radical and because it's so different that they immediately think it must be dangerous. It must be horrible in a collision, whereas in reality, it couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, Aptera has already started demonstrating how incredibly safe their vehicle design is, from a Formula 1 inspired roll cage, a wider than legally required crumple zone, and the outward mounted wheels don't require an axle between them, so that leaves less material, less structure to be pushed into the cabin in a front end collision, and also more side impact protection, plus the entire vehicle is a bit more rounded off with carbon fiber, pushing the pressure of the design outward instead of inward, not having as many flat, aluminum door panels like we have on traditional vehicles. This helps the Aptera be super aerodynamic, and because it's just a two-seater, you have a much wider crumple zone in the back than you would in a traditional SUV or sedan. Not to mention, even though it's a three-wheeler, it's an auto cycle, it still has airbags in the cabin to keep you as safe as humanly possible in a vehicle footprint like this. There's lots of startups out there that are basically making all the same things, right? We've got so many different versions of SUV. We have so many different versions of sedan. And there's so much capital being poured into these brands that are struggling to find buyers, struggling to figure out how to build their vehicles profitably. And I just want to ask these guys that keep pouring billions of dollars into these brands that are struggling to find customers, what is the end goal here? If you keep designing vehicles to be like gas cars, you're going to continue to struggle to find profitability. And if you keep expecting people to spend $60,000, $70,000 on your cars, they're just not going to be widespread. And if you don't know how to fundamentally rethink the way the vehicle is designed by requiring no paint for the exterior, by requiring smaller battery packs and still getting decent range out of it, you're not going to survive. They're all going to find the same fate. And that's why I think Aptera is criminally underrated. And it's shocking to me that they haven't found a couple $100 more million from some whale investors that can see what the future is for a vehicle footprint like this. No, it's not an SUV that can sit 5 people. I understand it's not going to be the perfect family car, but most families have more than one car. They have the SUV or the minivan for hauling all the kids around, and oftentimes that's a, used Windstar from 15 years ago because that's what they can afford, but they also need a commuter vehicle so mom or dad can get to work, or maybe mom and dad just want to have a fun getaway weekend and drive in something that feels like the future and drive in something that they don't have to worry about, oh no, what's the gas going to cost for us to take a weekend getaway trip? No, they could just leave it out on the street or leave it out in the driveway. It charges itself and you don't have to worry about it, and it's affordable. It's not something that's going to cost them $60,000+ like it is from all these other startup companies. And the more you start to understand why they designed the vehicle the way they did, making it as safe and efficient as possible, the more you'll start to realize that, while yes, when you look at it on a screen, it's a bit divisive and a lot of people don't like the look, but just like we're seeing right now with all the reactions of Tesla's Cybertruck, a lot of people, once they see it in person, realize, okay, this is actually way cooler. This is way more futuristic than I initially thought, and now, after sitting in one, I kind of want one, and I can attest from that after meeting with Aptera and they let me drive it myself after seeing it in person. Same thing with my wife, who was pretty hesitant by it at first when she saw it in videos and pictures, but once she saw it in person, same thing with my uncle, who also joined me on that trip. He was skeptical of it until he sat in one, till he rode around in it and realized, man, this is fast. It still feels incredibly stable and quiet on the inside despite being a three-wheeler. You still feel incredibly safe. You drive it like an everyday vehicle. Still has basic steering wheel and pedals. It accelerates very quickly because it's all-wheel drive, and Aptera is using these much more efficient, cheaper motors, which allow them to have such a lower starting price so the masses can afford it. And even if you need to plug it in from home and can't rely on the solar charging purely, it's going to use a fraction of the electricity compared to the most efficient EVs out there right now. The Model 3 is basically the most efficient EV you can find right now, and the Aptera is going to use less than half the electricity. So no matter what you're paying, if you got to go to a DC fast charger because you live in an apartment, or you got to charge from home, it's going to be less than half the price to fuel it, and that's assuming you don't get any solar charging at all, which I'm pretty confident you will. And I think the other major reason Tesla has such an insane lead on the electric vehicle space right now is because they put a huge emphasis in software. And let me tell you, after talking to Aptera's software team and seeing what they've showed us on the mobile app, they absolutely are putting a huge emphasis in making sure that the software for the vehicle is simple, intuitive, quick, and easy to understand. And unlike Tesla and Rivian, who I think are leaving a lot of potential buyers on the table, Aptera is actually happily adopting CarPlay and Android Auto to make sure that these phones that we kind of live off of continue to have feature parity and seamlessly integrate with the car, which is, I think, what a lot of people are going to be comfortable with and used to when coming from existing gas vehicles into this one. And of course, Aptera is targeting cheaper vehicles that will start under $30,000, and they'll start building those trims right after they get through the launch edition backlog. Every launch edition is the exact same spec. That keeps the manufacturing simple. They don't have any complexity or different trims to worry about because there's over 10,000 people that have already opted to switch to the launch edition production to make sure that they get their vehicle as soon as possible. So many wise choices from this company, realizing that the average car on the road has less than 2 people in them anyway, that I genuinely believe this could be the next big thing. They're using the small amount of investment they've gotten so far, and yet still the largest crowdfunding project in history, to get further to production than any other startup has ever gotten, with their battery pack supplier figured out, their assembly line in the works right now, their simple 6 main body structures already designed and being showcased right now in Paris, France. How are more investors not catching on to this idea that there is a vehicle unlike any other on the road that achieves better range, better affordability, incredible safety structures, and there's no other vehicle like this? Isn't that what you want to jump on as a potential investor that's looking for a way to make a difference in the world? You want to find something that's on the cusp of taking off. You want to find something that's truly not being valued properly, and no other company is making a vehicle like this. Honestly, I hate to say it, but if you're trying to invest in a startup that just wants to make another sedan, another pickup truck, or another SUV, they're all pretty much gonna fail compared to Tesla. And I own Tesla shares too. Tesla's probably a fairly safe investment, but their biggest wild card, of course, is Elon kind of betting the whole company on robo-taxis, which a lot of investors have already priced in, and that's why a lot of investors are kind of pulling out, because the valuation isn't justified with their current earnings, and everyone thought that they would be raking in tons of robo-taxi revenue right now, and they aren't. So who knows, maybe that'll change if they figure out the whole level 4, level 5 thing, but with the slow rollout of version 12, I'm not so convinced that Tesla's ever really going to justify that huge valuation. Even though I haven't sold a single share, I'm a little bit skeptical on whether or not it's going to become a multi-trillion-dollar brand in the near future. And if you want to make the Aptera dream a reality because you've got the funds to do it, I would just mention that they started back in 2008, they failed to get the funds necessary, and that didn't stop them, okay? The original founders got their money back together again to restart this company because they're that passionate about it. And if you listen to some of the great interviews over on Aptera Owners Club, these guys are not investing in Aptera to make it rich. They're not investing necessarily because they think they're all going to become millionaires with this stock. They're investing in it because they believe in it. They want this future to exist, and they know that it's a risk. It's a startup, and they may not get their money back, and they may not have an appreciating investment. But what's more important to them is that affordable solar-powered mobility becomes accessible to the masses, so that not just the rich and the upper class are able to afford clean, sustainable, grid-independent electric vehicles. They want all of these EV advantages of connected software, great acceleration, and clean energy, and also, of course, great range, along with a huge safety emphasis with the design. They think that should be accessible to as many people as possible, and that's why they're willing to pour hundreds of thousands of dollars into this company. And I think that's really special, and it's really unique, and I don't think you're gonna find a community as passionate or as willing to give and support without any expectation of something in return than you will with the Aptera fan base. So I'm no billionaire, but I've never wanted to be more right now, because I think Aptera should be getting all of the investment right now in the electric vehicle space, because they're pioneering a new design that is built for the battery chemistries of today, built for the solar technology of today to unlock use cases we could never have from any other product on the market right now. None of this, of course, is investment advice. I'm not a financial advisor. Do your own research. But seriously, I'm so impressed by what the community has raised for Aptera, but I'm disappointed whenever I see billions being wasted on brands that have no path towards profitability and have no intention on bringing a mass market affordable vehicle to any kind of scale to the market. A vehicle like this, I think, is eventually going to happen regardless. It's better for the masses, and it's better for our planet and our atmosphere for it to happen sooner rather than later. Thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. It seriously helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos, so thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.